Welcome to Prime Life. We call it Retirement 2.0. Leave each episode with tips and new ideas to help you navigate retirement in our new age. It's your time. Make it count.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended as medical, investment, or financial advice. We do not sponsor or endorse any of the individuals, companies, products, or services featured on this podcast. Any statements or opinions expressed are of the individual who makes them. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Prime Life Podcast. I'm excited to be here today with my co-hosts, Mary and Laura. Mary, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well today. It is a Friday, even though this will air on a Tuesday. And I'm hoping for the sun to continue to come out and warm us.
It is a Friday, and you'll publish on a Tuesday, but you'll probably edit on a Sunday. So,
that does happen often.
Laura, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Excited to be here and excited for our guest. And, it's been a wonderful spread of guests since the beginning. And this year has just gotten better and better. And with that, I'm just going to jump right into the introduction here. We have with us today Jan Turner. Jan is a certified integral life coach, an associated certified coach. She's going to tell us more about what that means. A financial services executive and a longtime community leader. So we love ourselves individuals who are multifaceted, and Jan is certainly that. She believes in bringing the human back to organizations by developing highly impactful human-centered leaders who live and lead from a place of fullness. So Jan, fabulous introduction. We're very excited that you've taken the time to join us today. Why don't you jump in, introduce yourself a little bit more, and then let's dive into the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Laura and Mary and Joseph. It's an incredible pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm a huge fan of your podcast and just all that you do to help promote longevity for your audience. So pleasure to be here. So yeah, you're probably thinking, what is integral coaching? Like, what is this all about? So ultimately, I support clients by using methods that attend to their whole life. And this is focused on not only helping them to achieve goals, but to develop competencies that allow them to be self-generating in their own development. So the common topics that people, often will seek coaching for are work issues, health or relationship challenges, wanting to start or stop a habit, or transitions of any kind. It could be stepping into a new promotion, wanting to take one's career in a new direction, or even preparing for retirement. What I wanted to share a little bit more about integral coaching is that it's unique in that a person may come to coaching because of a challenge in one area of life, such as work. And I look for what might be underlying that particular challenge and where else it might be showing up in their life. So I work with the individual to understand the deeper issue, but also to help them develop greater skill to meet challenges in all different aspects of their life. So ultimately, a coaching relationship that starts about work could result in improvements in relationships, in health, or in other areas of that person's life. So, you mentioned earlier in the introduction that I've kind of, cut my teeth in financial services over many years. And as part of that, I've led, functions, I've led teams across 11 different disciplines and a whole host of business environments. So I really support other people's growth through trust, through candor, through powerful questioning, sharing relevant observations and distinctions, and helping them have focused accountability that can help them have lasting effects. So that's just a little bit about what I do.
Well, that sounds wonderful. And I can attest in conversations we've had before, since I've known Jan for a while, and she is amazing. But I would really love to know, why did you become a coach?
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. And I value our relationship, and I know we go way back. So thank you again. Yeah. I had some pretty serious challenges that ultimately led to some epiphanies that brought me to sit here with you today. So I'll try to share just a quick synopsis of my story. Um, Basically, when I reflect back on my childhood, I had a keen focus on independence, right? Really just being able to be independent and self sufficient. I didn't want to have to rely on anybody. And a lot of that just came out of family dynamics in our household. My mom was very warm. She was very loving. She was a stay at home mom, very devoted. My father was a wonderful man. We grew closer later in life before he passed away, but he really didn't value her role as a mother, as a homemaker. And that left a mark on me. So when I started approaching my education and my career, I felt really driven to achieve and really focused on success. So I devoted my career for decades to just driving, right, for achievement, kind of chasing stuff, running. And ultimately, I navigated the financial crisis, was involved in mergers and acquisitions, and I found myself at one point in transition between jobs. And it was because I had left a job. And I've never identified as a quitter. So this was really hard for me. And I got into this mindset where my personality patterns really just started to become a problem. And I found myself in burnout, although I didn't have words for it at the time. And my immune system cratered, and I ended up with a life threatening infection. And there I was in the hospital. And I eventually got out and was on intravenous antibiotics for a whole month. And I thought, never again. And I recovered. I went and I actually started a new job. And then guess what? A few years later, burnout times two. And this time it was different factors. It was, office politics. It was frustration with where I was in my career. And I had the privilege at the time of working with an executive coach who was really phenomenal. And it really was a privilege to work with him. And he used, although he didn't call it this at the time, and I didn't realize this at the time, but he used a mind, body, heart approach in meeting me where I was and putting me on a path of really recovery and catalyzing a self-development journey in me. And when I was working with him, I had this realization that someday I'm going to do this work and I'm going to give back to others. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, and I kind of forgot about it for a while. So then a few years later, I ended up losing my mom. She passed away on Christmas Day of 2018. And a few hours after she passed away, after, we finished opening all the Christmas gifts with the kids and having breakfast, I, grabbed a shower and I was in my bathroom. And all of a sudden the room lit up. And this voice said to me, live a fierce life. It was just like this channeled message, and it was really powerful. And I was like, wow, I don't know what to do with that. I'm sure as heck going to remember it, right? So a couple years later, it came to me, it's time. And I pursued my coach training through New Ventures West to become an integral coach and really just set off on this path to help others live and lead from a place of wholeness.
So you mentioned a bunch of different ideas in that last answer. I want to focus on the transition part. And I was poking around your website prior to, this recording today, and you talk about helping people get unstuck. So I wanted to dive into that a little bit as it relates to people who are going through transitions in their lives, because a lot of our listeners are maybe getting toward retirement, or maybe they're in retirement and they just feel like there's nothing left for them to do. But in reality, there's probably a ton of things for them to do. So maybe you could just address that and how you help people get unstuck.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole unstuck thing is a real, it's a real challenge, right? And I think I'd like to answer that by talking a little bit about what it means to live fiercely right? Because this concept almost sounds a little grandiose, right? It sounds, to me, honestly, I went at one point and I looked up the definition of fierce. I was like, what is it? I expected it to be sharp and about bravery and about courage and all this stuff. But when I looked up the definition, it actually said something to the effect of showing a heartfelt and powerful intensity. And I was like, wow. So think about that. When you're a person who's stuck, right, or stagnant in your career, or you're just not sure what to do next, right, with the next chapter of your life or what have you, this notion of living a fierce life can be pretty powerful. And it comes up a lot in the work that I do with clients. So what I've learned is what it means to live fiercely, right? What it means to potentially get unstuck, not be stagnant, is as unique as each person. And at the same time, I've seen 7 themes or so like around this whole concept of what it means to live fiercely. And they include a few things, right? It includes being open, curious, and empathetic. It includes, being attuned to your feelings, your sensations, your body, clear about your needs, your preferences, your strengths, your gifts, what you desire, being able to be creative, playful, and have this like sense of expansiveness, being confident, relaxed, decisive, and resilient, and connected to and vested in others and in the world around you. And ultimately being intentional, forward moving, and impactful, right? And in work, yes, but in all realms of life. So to your question about, stagnation, ultimately it depends on the person and it depends on what's underneath that feeling that's keeping them stuck. But these are the sorts of themes that really, I think, come up a lot in coaching.
So you mentioned that everyone is unique and different, and of course they would be, right? We're all humans here. But can you share some tips and guidance to help listeners navigate their own transitions and get the most out of what they would consider their next chapter, whether it's in their career or their personal life, or maybe it's combined?
Yeah, I appreciate that question a lot. Yeah, well, when I think about folks who are navigating the next step in their career and, folks who, perhaps are a little bit later in career, I think about this in a couple ways. I can talk a little bit about the typical issues that folks bring to coaching around this. And then I can talk a little bit about, some of the common dynamics that can be underneath these issues. So the typical issues that later career professionals bring to coaching around, transitions, um, I'd say there's maybe 4 or 5 themes that I've seen most often. Joseph just touched on one of them, which is feeling stagnant or drifting in career. So they don't know how to break out of it and they want to contribute more, but they're not sure what to do to kind of catalyze that. They want to pivot in their career or they want to shape like a next more fulfilling chapter or chapters, but they don't know where to start or they just feel like stuck with fear. They may want to break the pattern of workaholism, for lack of a better phrase, or burnout, or like teetering on the edge of burnout. They might want to establish like healthier habits and just have more longevity. Right? They're feeling a need to kind of pay attention to these things now before it's potentially a little bit too late.
Can I just,
And then,
can I just jump in for a quick second?
yeah, please.
Can you define burnout? Because I think everyone probably thinks of burnout differently.
Yeah. So burnout, the way I've experienced it and studied it is it's like a state of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion, right? But it's characterized by a number of different emotions and dynamics that literally can really affect somebody's health, right? Can lead to patterns of, fatigue, of, illness, problems with sleep, right? Almost like this bit of a spiral, right? And there can even be elements of depression, depending on the person, that can accompany feelings of burnout. But I think one thing that I want to highlight is burnout is not just ultimately connected to overwork or exhaustion. What I've experienced and realized in my work with others is it's really connected back, underneath these things, to a disconnection with self, right? A disconnection with self. And what I've noticed is that can happen to adults just because over years they're perhaps chasing something, right? It could be a goal in their life career wise. It could be, finding a partner and settling down and having kids. But there's always like a sort of activity, like a running. And eventually you can get to a point where you're like, okay, I've achieved what I was hoping to achieve, but is this it? Right? And you can have a real challenge around that psychology that can creep in. So this disconnection from self is, I think, a big part of the challenge. It was certainly a part of my challenge years ago, but it's also something that when you, I think, work with the right partner or partners, you can really get underneath these things and then create a much deeper connection with yourself and become, like I said earlier, self-generating in your own development going forward, which is powerful. It's really taking back the ability to lead yourself. And in some cases, honestly, be a parent to yourself.
So you've talked a lot about, I'm going to call them symptoms and signs, which I appreciated hearing. And I like that you explained burnout, because I think there are a lot of definitions out there. And so I would think that perhaps more people experience it, but they don't call it burnout. So that's just a comment. I believe when someone maybe is experiencing the need for a coach, I'm just going to go out on a limb here, it can be overwhelming. They know they need to, quote unquote, try to navigate through, again, personal, professional. A lot of times they're tied together. So, Jan, what would you suggest is a good few baby steps? Because I think when we chunk things out for individuals, it helps them understand and not be so nervous or worried to take that first action step that will get them on the road to seeking some, let's call it help, because that's what it is. But also, again, I think it can be a revelation, a revolution, a transformation. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
And we'll get that answer after a brief word from our commercial sponsors.
NASA is always working harder to be your carrier of choice. We offer insurance products that can help you meet your retirement goals, such as protecting your savings, securing lifetime income, or paying for healthcare costs. We're dedicated to providing best-in-class service and are keeping things simple, and we'll have your back. We have around 400,000 policyholders and contract holders and have been doing this for a long time, 170 years, but we remain humble enough to always try to improve. For more information, visit nfg.com. Nassau insurance products are issued by Nassau Life and Annuity Company of Hartford, Connecticut, Nassau Life Insurance Company, East Greenbush, New York, or Nassau Life Insurance Company of Kansas, Overland Park, Kansas. Subsidiaries of Nassau Financial Group. Products are not available in all areas. Policyholder counts are for all Nassau companies as of September 30th, 2022, and are subject to change.
Yeah, I love your question, Mary. I think there's two things that I'd like to share that are very practical illustrations of how one can kind of, start to be a little bit of a sleuth in their own life, whether they work with somebody or not, around some of the issues we've been talking about. So I'll pick up first on the topic of, burnout, right? Experiencing burnout, or candidly, just like having your identity really wrapped up in what you do for a living, right? even if you're not feeling particularly burnt out. So there are a couple of quick, almost like self-checks that somebody can do if they're in this, state of mind. One is to say, when was the last time that I felt joy in what I'm doing? And how can I bring more of this into my current work? Right? 2 questions, only you know the answer, right? Doesn't take a lot of time to think about it, but how often do folks pause and ask themselves questions like that? It's normally not too often. But another one that's even more, I don't know, provocative, maybe even impactful, is to say, back in childhood, what was it that made me feel a sense of awe, a sense of wonder? And think back to like 2 or 3 examples of when you felt those things when you were a kid. And then ask yourself, how can I bring more of this into my life now? Right? So I'll share with you like a personal observation on this. For me as a kid, when I really started reflecting on this as an adult, many, many years later, I realized my experiences with my pets, especially my pet birds, and nature were incredibly formative and almost magical at times, right? Like I had some experiences that were absolutely sacred as a kid in these ways, right? And I realized at the time that something special was happening, that something was cool was happening, like time would cease to exist. I'd be in these situations that were just really touching, really beautiful, you know? But then I shook it off and I didn't give it much thought, honestly, for decades. And, I grew up in Western Massachusetts. I grew up in a very, I guess I would say suburban place. My husband says, no, honey, it wasn't suburban. It was rural. You just think it was suburban. And my neighbors and I would joke that the Boys in the Hood came out way back when, right? And my neighbors and I would joke that we were the kids in the woods based on where we lived, right? But that connection back to being in the woods, just walking in the woods, I had some incredibly magical experiences then. So as an adult, I've been getting more in touch with that, spending more time outside, spending more time just sitting outside, listening to the birds, right? In the morning, at sunset, walking in the woods alone or with others and just observing.
As long as those birds aren't from the movie The Birds and they come and attack you.
Yeah.
Earlier, you answered one of the questions, and you didn't use the word, but the word that came to my mind was sort of mindfulness. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what that means, why it's important, how people could integrate mindfulness into their lives to help alleviate the anxieties that you mentioned earlier. So let's let you take it from there for a few minutes.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, mindfulness is so important, right? So when you think about mindfulness, it's ultimately about being more present in your life, whether whether it's in your home, right, at work, whether you're in a situation where you're feeling stress or you're very much at peace and alone. And some folks will equate mindfulness to meditation. Meditation is just one form of mindfulness. And I would argue that meditation is not for everybody. It's not that it couldn't be, but it's not necessarily the place to start. Mindfulness is the sort of practice that can cultivate, significant reductions in stress, the ability to be more grounded, the ability to actually connect more deeply with your own emotions and what you're feeling, and then enable yourself to actually move through those things instead of bypassing them and moving around them. So mindfulness is just, so powerful, right? Whether it's just, sitting outside and paying attention to nature, and just allowing yourself to be touched by something, right? Or by someone, and really engaging in a conversation in a way where you're really attuning to that person and really listening to them in a very deep way is a form of mindfulness that doesn't require you to be secluded and sitting on a mat. And one, practical tip that I'd like to share is when you're feeling overwhelmed, right? Or maybe defensive or just stressed. One thing that you can do that takes no money, takes no training, is to do just a very simple, 60-second grounding practice. Sitting in a chair just like we're all doing right now, allowing yourself to let yourself just feel your feet on the floor, feel the connection, feel the weight of your feet on the floor, sense into the outline of your feet. Allow your arms to just rest comfortably in your lap. Feel your hands on your lap. Close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. Take a few deep breaths. Allow yourself to just focus on the air coming in and out, the quality, the texture, and just sense into the interior of the body as if it was just one, unit, like just one thing. And just see what's there for you right now, whether there's stress, tension. See if you can soften it. See if you can, let it just be a little lighter. And then ask yourself in your head or out loud, it doesn't matter, what's calling for my attention right now, right? That's a way to access your own inner wisdom that anybody can do. And it shows you that presence isn't a luxury, it's essential.
I love that. It's interesting. And I've never thought about texture of air, but I'll be thinking about that more now, especially as I'm taking a walk in different environments, right? So I guess question for you would be, we talk a lot about presence, talk a lot about self, and this entire conversation has been extremely human. Can you tell us if in any way does technology software play a role in this journey? And if so, for example, we've had guests come on previously and they've talked about, whether they use certain apps or certain trackers or certain, digital journaling, etc. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts around where technology does or does not play in this space?
Yeah, I love the question. One of the things I ask when I'm coaching somebody is I ask about their relationship with technology. And part of that is just to understand the role of technology in their day-to-day life, right? How much time are they spending on screens? How much time are they spending engaging with people more face to face, right? What's their relationship to social media? Do they find themselves going down rabbit holes of, time suck into social media and then realizing, well, I don't have discretionary time to do these other things that are important to me, but I'm probably spending 90 minutes on social media, right? So the relationship of ourselves to technology is important, especially when you think about a number of people who need to also be on technology just in the course of their work. So that's important. When it comes to self-development and the role of technology in supporting people in their own kind of self-development journey, I think a lot of it comes down to preferences and a lot of it comes down to what works for you. So I have clients who use the Calm app, right? Use other sorts of meditation apps, and there are many of them out there. I'm a big fan of Insight Timer. I like to do silent meditation, but I love to enter meditation with a chime, right, or a bell, and then come out of it with that sort of experience. And ultimately, if those apps or tech supports are allowing you to develop a practice or practices that are supportive for you, that nurture you, that nourish you, then I think that's a great application of technology. But it really is a personal preference. I have clients that they don't want to spend more time on tech. They don't want me to recommend things that are going to require them to be downloading apps or, journaling on a computer. They want to go the old-fashioned way. So it really is personal preference. And at the end of the day, it comes back to what's really nourishing you.
No, that sounds completely doable, right? Meet people where they are. We had a guest on Prime Life who actually, Kimpita, Love Your Mental Health, and she does sound meditation. And it's really interesting. I myself do the apps. I do both Calm and Headspace. And I've been doing Headspace for a long time, and it does help, but I think it's more than that. I think it's a lot more. And you've outlined a lot of great insights and observations. And I love that you have shared your experiences with your clients to share with us today. As we're getting to the end of our conversation, before we ask the final question, Joseph, Laura, do you have any final comments for Jan or questions?
No, I'm good. I think you'll get the last question in a second. But no, good. It's good conversation. Very mindful of today's conversation.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about the texture of air. So I think that this has been something that's it's good in that it's slowed me down to be present in the moment in our conversation, to not only think about the words that we're exchanging, but also what that means on a personal level and how I can integrate that in my day to day. So I appreciated that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, it's sometimes challenging to be really thinking too, instead of thinking and hearing what someone's saying, even in a meeting. Rather than thinking about what the response is. I know I've had to do a lot of check in with that. So Jan, you have a very interesting background, very steeped in many things, financial and whatnot. You can do anything that you want at this stage of your career. Why do you do what you do?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I realized, I don't know, a few years ago that self-development is a form of lifelong learning. And it's the kind of thing that you can't just check a box on and say, I've done that. I've done that self-development thing. I'm kind of done with that. I'm moving on. You can, but then I think you really miss like the power of what self-development can mean in terms of one's journey, in this lifetime. So when I realized that, it kind of changed the trajectory of my life and what is important to me and where I spend my time. And supporting others in their unique journeys, whether they're leaders, just as fellow humans, is the kind of thing where even though the work can be intense, right? Even though the work can be challenging, it makes my cup overflow, right? Even with the compassion that's required and necessary for it, and with myself and my own journey. So ultimately, I think, to answer your question, it's like there's a real sense of release and freedom for me in terms of engaging in self-development and seeing it as something that doesn't have an endpoint. There's the ability to start dreaming again, which was something that I feel like years ago I had actually stopped doing. And it was only when I really realized it that I was like, oh my God, when did that happen? Right? And there's a lightness, there's an aliveness that comes in. You play and explore more, whether it's in your work or in your life, and relationships can take on new depth, new richness. And, I would just put out there that you can realize like, hey, it's not a zero-sum game. And to me, that's really powerful. So that's why I do what I do, and I'm very grateful to do it.
If individuals want to get hold of you, Jan, what's the best way?
Yeah, I would say the best place is to visit jan-turner.com.
We appreciate you joining us today and spending some time out of your busy schedule. Laura, Joseph, always great to spend time with you. And to our audience, like us, follow us, give us feedback, tell us what we're doing, maybe things that you don't like. We'd love to hear from you. Until the next episode of the Prime Life Podcast, we say au revoir.
Thank you.
Remember to subscribe to the Prime Life Podcast anywhere you find podcasts. You can find all of our episodes, contact information, and more on our website, primelifepodcast.com. Stay connected with us. Follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.